In connection with the PBS series Asian Americans, the Center for Asian American Media and WETA, WYES is proud to partner with the members of the Asian American community to present a roundtable discussion exploring lessons from Asian American history that can help us understand the challenges, struggle, and experience of Asian Americans in the United States and also right here in New Orleans. Hello, everyone. I'm Sula Kim, evening anchor of WDSU Channel 6. Thank you for joining us. My panelists today, a great group of people who are going to share their experiences and journey with us. Jeffrey Kuo, ER doctor and hospital administrator, also second-generation Taiwanese American. Thank you so much for being here. Ben Han, assistant professor in the Department of Communication at Tulane University, also the author of Beyond the Black and White TV, Asian and Latin American Spectacle in Cold War America. We also have Wendy Jung, developmental psychologist, but also a member of the Asian Pacific American Society, APES, very involved, and also a local Asian American Chinese American who can share with us your journeys and stories with us. Rebecca Wen, representing the Vietnamese community here in New Orleans, also a licensed professional counselor. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really excited to start this discussion and hopefully learn myself and educate the public about the experiences of Asian Americans. We saw some video, a very compelling video and clips. What stood out? Let's start with what stood out the most for you guys. Let's start with you, Ben. What video you think was most compelling and influenced your journey?
Well, the fact that, throughout the history, how Asians have been kind of racialized as a kind of a perpetual foreigner or an alien, and there's always this pressure to assimilate into American society, and that's a lot of burdens placed on also young generations, right? Because, and I think, even the media has kind of reinforced those stereotypes. So, seeing how Asians have become more active in kind of fighting for their rights, I think it's kind of really resonated with me.
Okay, so then should we start off with the topic of stereotypes in the Asian American, since we were talking about Theresa Lee and the Dreamers Act? I didn't really know that the impetus and the person who kind of catapulted this Dreamers Act was Korean American Theresa Lee from the video clip that we saw, and then later she's leading these massive protests. Ben, what were your thoughts about Theresa Lee and also the issue of DACA?
I was actually really impressed with her. I think that at the beginning of her clip, you saw the model minority.
Right.
The young lady who studied piano and worked so hard, was so driven, self-motivated, also had the parents that were driving her to continue to excel. And then you see the transition from the young lady that we mentioned and we saw initially to the one that was really fighting the good fight, making sure that minorities as a whole were represented in America, and I was really, really impressed with her because of that.
Yeah, did you know that the person who started the first Dreamer was Korean?
I actually thought that was great. I had no idea, to be honest with you, and perhaps that's just my naivete, but realistically speaking, we have all of these minorities that really are a very important part of the culture of the United States, and to have an Asian American as the first Dreamer was really, really enlightening to me and really exciting.
Yeah, what did you think, Rebecca?
I mean, I thought the same thing. It was I was surprised by the story because, you always hear about DACA and, Hispanic Americans, but I felt really proud, because, Asian Americans are not known for their vocalness,
or political activism, like in the form that Theresa did, right? She was very vocal and very active, right? Wendy, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was amazing. Like, this legislation was written for her, but then it also included all these other cultures, and so I mean, it was kind of unfortunate. World events sort of delayed it and kept delaying it, but yeah, it was quite amazing that she was able to help enact that legislation.
Okay, and then while we're on the topic of model minorities and the fact that she was playing this piano, right? I mean, I played the violin. Who played the violin and piano growing up? Every Asian American, right, has a classical instrument education. We have to work hard. Is that the stereotypes, right? We all know we're kind of nerdy, right? That's the stereotype. Everybody cheated off of me, or when I was in school, they had to sit next to me because they thought I wasn't good at math at all. By the way, I broke every stereotype. So, I'm not a lawyer, or I'm not in business, or a doctor. Everybody thinks the Asian girl's gonna grow up to be so smart, but I wasn't good in math, yet the stereotype is, oh, she's Asian, so maybe if I sit next to her and copy her homework, I'll get an A as well. Well, where does that stereotype come from? Is that true? Is it just a generalization? What are your thoughts? Is that the model minority myth? Is that what?
Some way, I think,
Can you tell us what that
going
is?
back even the 1960s when there was this stereotype of the talented Asian musician that kind of gets circulated because a lot of Asian musicians participate in international competitions, and also the fact that we have to think about this in a historical context when when there was this Red Scare kind of in the U.S. Against communism, and these Asians in the form of Japanese war brides were seen as kind of exemplary models because they're kind of passive, they work hard, they try to assimilate. So we Asians are kind of seen as model minorities for other people of color, right? That they look up to. And these are, I think, very kind of myths that exist and that places a lot of burden on us, that we have to be successful, that we have to do what, become a doctor or engineer, or rather choose a career path that we're more passionate about.
Is that true? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, I was a mathlete in high school, and I went to high school with Sal Khan. He was the founder of Khan Academy, and he's the biggest mathlete. So, yeah, we were on the math club together. So yeah, it seemed like. Well, the thing is that when you think about the Asian Americans, a lot of us come because our parents were, had student visas or whatnot, or they were engineers, or they came for educational purposes. So when you think about the Asian bell curve, we're sort of a biased sample that for a lot of us that our parents are a little bit more educated, and of course they're going to reinforce those things at home if they're engineers or if they have a strong math background. So that's kind of where the stereotype comes from a little bit, is that these are sort of, my parents were not very good at English because that wasn't their first language. So of course they're going to reinforce math because that was what they're good at.
The universal language, right?
Yeah. So. Right. So in some ways, it's what's fostered at home, and like you said, I'm a developmental psychologist, and it's the nature versus nurture, and that's what's being nurtured at home is some of that math stuff, because my parents couldn't necessarily help me up with my English homework. So
let's talk about the model minority myth and some of the stereotypes for Asian Americans. So Jeff, did you feel pressure to be a doctor because you are Asian American, and did your parents kind of pressure you to go into the medical field?
Oh, I absolutely did. From the time I was probably 3, I remember my parents saying to me, "Oh, you're going to be a doctor one day." And so, in fact, that resounded in me. And at one point, I pushed back and went to college thinking, I'm going to be a PE teacher and be a high school football coach. That's really what I wanted to do. And then ultimately, being the good Asian kid, I chose the career path that my parents thought would be best for me. And, in retrospect, I thought it turned out really, really well for me. And I'm happy that it happened this way. But nonetheless, I don't necessarily know that this is the career path I would have chosen had it not been for the fact that my parents drove it into me so strongly when I was a kid.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about that, and then I do want to get back to I like that, because I like how you said that, Ben, because in the video clips that we watch, a lot of history maybe kind of influenced that, starting with the Chinese laborers who built the railroads, and then the Chinese Exclusion Act, and that kind of, opened a can of worms in terms of paper son and a lot of Chinese immigrants kind of having fraudulent documents to be in America. Why was it so important for them to be in America? Is this a land of opportunity? Is that why the land of opportunity dreams? And like you said, they came. My parents always said that to me. My parents, your parents told you to be a doctor, right? Why? Because you have to take advantage of America. My parents said, and I wish I could inject needles, and I wish I wasn't so, freaked out about blood, or else I would have been a doctor. I'm not as smart to be a lawyer, but I knew for me, my dad always said, and my parents are the typical immigration story, the immigrant story where they come really with $200 in there. I mean, how many immigrant stories do we know of where people always say, my family came with $200 in their pocket. And they come to America and all of a sudden, you know, they take advantage of capitalism and they're millionaires because they started a business. And the reason why Korean Americans started businesses is because they didn't really have an American education or formal education. They couldn't apply for jobs, they didn't have degrees, but they knew in America you could do anything you set your mind to. So, you know, Koreans are known, the stereotype is, it's a generalization, but it's kind of true, which is why it's there. They own a lot of stores, liquor stores, restaurants, or dry cleaners. For the Vietnamese American community, I know.
Yeah,
like
it's a lot of gas stations.
Gas stations and nail salons, right?
Definitely nail salons.
So my dad always said to me, we sacrificed a lot to come to America. And so since we're in America, this is the land of opportunities and dreams, and you can do anything you set your mind to. So I want you to go make something of yourself. That's what my dad always told me. So for me, since I was little, it was enforced, you need to just work hard, have a dream, and fulfill that dream. You know, whether it's a doctor or a lawyer or anything you do, just set your mind to it and take advantage of being in the land of milk and honey. Is that why they wanted to come to America?
I think so. I mean, the idea of the American dream, right, for better socioeconomic opportunities. So they, you know, a lot of, you know, even think of like diaspora, right? They like migrated to other parts of the world for better opportunities. Just like even the Chinese laborers who came to work on the railroads, we also had, you know, Chinese and even Koreans migrate to Hawaii to work on sugarcane plantations and so on. So, I mean, it was because there was a demand for the labor, and they were treated very harshly and had to work in poor working conditions. But they always had that sense that, you know, we're going to kind of undergo through all these hardships to, you know, achieve success, and, you know, to kind of live the kind of the middle class American life that these are like in the suburbs. So I think that's kind of the motivation that drew a lot of them to come.
And then the Chinese Exclusion Act, were they trying to prohibit Chinese laborers from coming because of job competition, or why?
Yeah, I think so, yeah, because of job competition, and also, you know, they were seen as threats to the nation, right? And there's always this anxiety of, you know, kind of intermixing with other races, I think, kind of Chinese marrying, you know, white women and so on. So I think there's always a fear of, you know, the other race having being a threat to the U.S. as a nation.
And Wendy, you were telling me that your parents knew about the issue of Paper Sun and the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, we're from Taiwan, but yeah, it's where you pay someone to have their basically like to say that you're their descendant, and so you have rights to be here. But that's, you know, it's fraudulent papers more or less, and so yeah, I mean, I would feel like. I mean, I think that's still kind of going on these days with we have these undocumented workers and just this feeling of not being safe here, because any second, you know, the ICE can come and tell you to go back. And so from watching that documentary, that's kind of some of the feelings that I got from how your papers were really important, and how even like the Dreamers, like it was hard for Theresa Lee to apply for college because she didn't have a social security number, and it's just this feeling of instability because you don't have a legal right to be here. So
how do you feel about that then, guys? How do you feel about the fact that, you know, we come to America to be a dreamer, right? To dream, yet now it's hard because there's a lot of enforcements or, you know, regulations or, you know, and people have to go through hoops and hurdles and perhaps even make fraudulent documents just to be in America. What do you think about that?
Not to politicize it, but I think that this country was founded on folks coming over, you know, crossing the ocean in order to find opportunity, to come to the land of the free where there is opportunity. And, you know, I think that we have to stay true to our roots to a certain degree, while understanding, of course, that you can't just have completely open borders where, you know,
and you should do it
folks can
legally, because there are ways to do it legally,
you
right?
have to take, we don't want people taking advantage of us as in Americans.
Right.
But at the same time, we want to be able to afford others the opportunities that we have had. You know, my mom comes from a family of 6, and my father comes from a family of 5. And every one of my parents' siblings either live in the United States or has at some point in their lives. And they did come over legally. My mom's oldest sister had a green card, after which she then applied for every one of her siblings to come over and my grandparents. My mother got her green card. My dad had a student visa. My mother was then able to sponsor my father to get a green card. And they've been in the United States the majority of their adult lives because of it. And still to this day, my mom will say that they came over for opportunity because they thought that the United States offered them an opportunity for a better life. And she really does believe that that is still the case. And so, you know, from that perspective, I think that America is a fantastic country where folks can come over of all different races and be able to thrive if they work hard.
Yeah, we have so much to be thankful for. What about you, Rebecca? You have a good immigration story you want to share with your family.
Just to piggyback a little bit on what Jeff said, you know, our parents have their immigrant story. My parents left Vietnam to come here to escape religious persecution. They wanted religious freedom. You know, they were Catholics. They wanted to practice Catholicism. So that's part of what brought them here. And now that they're here, they're thriving, you know, the church is such a big part of who they are in the community. And it's really, you know, held a lot of the Vietnamese community together, I think, over the years.
New Orleans has a very big Vietnamese community.
Yes.
Is that what the majority of your friends in the community experience? Can you tell us a little bit about being a Vietnamese American in the New Orleans community, where we have a huge population?
Yeah, we have a huge population. Yeah, so just listening to you guys talk about, you know, growing up and having those tiger parents, you know, I had the same kind of experience. Yet I deviated from it a little bit. You know, there was like a group of girls that were like ahead of me, you know, who were excellent students. Like just, we all went to Ben Franklin, and they excelled. They got 4.0s on everything, and I was always being compared to, you know, these girls who are like, you know, the model Asian students.
Asian parents comparing you? No.
Meanwhile, I was interested in things like art and music and psychology, you know, and they, to this day, they still don't really understand my fascination, my passion for psychology. I remember the day that I graduated from undergrad, the next day my mom was like, oh, well, maybe you should be an accountant. And I was like, oh, okay, just shook my head.
Anything with numbers, right? Yeah.
You know, it's funny you say that because my parents, they tried so hard to assimilate, hence giving us all American names, right? My name is Jeffrey, my brother's name is Benjamin, my sister's name is Angela, and my parents assumed American names as well. My dad's name is Alex, and my mother's name is Eva, and they did everything they could to make us that model minority and to assimilate. And so they actually wanted to appear as American as possible. And so from a very young age, my parents had me playing soccer and baseball and football and basketball. And some of my best memories growing up are still my parents, especially my dad, screaming in the stands while I'm playing football, like in the state championship game for Louisiana for football. And these are unbelievable memories for me. But looking back at it in retrospect as a 42-year-old man, I see how much effort my parents put into assimilating to try to make sure that we were that model minority. You work hard, you are respectful, you know, and I think that a lot of us in the Asian American community can probably, you know, understand why that happens, but how that also adds, as Ben mentioned earlier, how much that adds additional pressure onto us as Asian Americans growing up to be able to succeed. And, you know, for some of us, that really does end up being a positive. I take that chip on my shoulder to this day with me professionally every single day. I walk into every meeting and I think to myself, I'm the Asian in this room full of white and black people. I have to make sure that they believe that I belong. And so I have to work harder than them, and I have to be more respectful than them, and things of that nature.
Represent. You want to be
Indeed.
a model representation of the Asian Americans.
That's
Do you
right.
feel that way? Because when I was, interning at news stations wanting to be the next Connie Chung, millennials won't know who Connie Chung is, but I remember a mentor said to me, she said, you have to work harder, Sula, because you are Asian American. And if you make a mistake, people are not going to say, Sula Kim made a mistake. They're going to say, that Asian girl made that mistake. Do you think that's true? Do you feel that way?
I think, I'm married to a white man, and so we have these conversations all the time at home where, the first thing, when somebody makes a mistake, the first attribute we look at is the color of their skin. And really, that shouldn't be the case. But it happens because it's an easy attribute to have, is to look at someone.
Because we're human.
Yes,
That's the first thing we see.
It's the first thing we
Correct.
see.
Yes.
And so in some ways, yes, I do feel like when I'm lecturing in front of students that I have to represent myself as an Asian American, and I have to understand, and I take these experiences and I try not to tokenize my students, whether or not, if they're white or black or Asian or Hispanic or Latino or whatever. But yeah, it's like that's the first thing that people see. And sometimes people call that stereotype threat. Like you have, and so this is a phenomenon in psychology where if you know that you're bad at something and that's primed, that, like, for instance, the example I use a lot is Asian women are stereotyped as being bad drivers, right?
Yes,
So
I know that very
anytime
well.
I try to, I'm a very good driver. So
Are you sure? But
I
that's
am.
according to whom? You?
my insurance
Or
company
your
and
husband?
so I can parallel park very well, but when someone's watching, though, I just can't do it. So, and it's the stereotype threat, because they're like, oh, look at that Asian woman,
Right.
she can't parallel park.
Right.
And
Me
so-
too. You're right, because my insurance, I have no accidents. Right? I've had no run-ins, no traffic citations or tickets. So my insurance agent says I'm an excellent driver. But when my husband sees me drive, he's like, you're the worst driver ever. So do you think that's why I can't drive? Because I feel pressured? Like, oh no, someone's watching me and he thinks I'm bad.
I mean,
it's psychology, right? That's all in your head.
It's a psychological phenomenon. Like, if you are told that women are bad at math, then, and if you feel like you identify as being a woman and you're told that right before you take a math test, studies have shown that women will do worse if that's primed. And so in some ways, like, you feel like there's this pressure, this stereotype threat that you have to fulfill whatever people are expecting. Like, you be good at math, you have to play an instrument or be a doctor or an engineer or whatever. And so if you don't fulfill that, then that sort of threatens your self-worth or whatnot. So
Do you guys feel like we are See, but I like the fact that there was a myth. I read your email and you said model minority, and I thought to myself, honestly, I did. We are the model minority, and then it says myth. So that means it's not true?
In some ways, I think, it's this myth that's created, right, to kind of, establish kind of certain standards around Asian Americans, that you have to be this way, to be considered successful, or, so it kind of doesn't allow for kind of other kind of representations of Asian Americans to emerge. And even when you look at media, it's always the techie Asian guys playing different characters, or the martial arts fighters. So it very limits the way that people understand what Asian Americans are really about. So I think it is indeed kind of a myth, or kind of a construction. Yeah.
And some of it is again, attributing it to the color of your skin. And it's not really attributing to maybe our family structure, or, growing up with having a dad that's always present in the household, or, but yeah, so there might be other things that are contributing to why maybe Asian Americans have this perceived myth of being this model minority.
Well, I like what you said, Ben, about how it limits what we're about, that we're about more than just being good at math or being a successful doctor and so forth. But let's be honest here. We're all Asians, and we're still talking about success today. I love talking. We're still talking about how hard we have to work. If this was a different group of minorities, do you think there would be a different topic that would take center stage? We're Asians, and we're still talking about, let's work harder, let's be successful, let's fulfill the American dream, let's make sure that we're the model representation, and let's not let anyone down. Let's say face, we've got pride, right? We've got to represent our community very well. We're still talking about success. Why is that so important to us?
Well, I think that Wendy said it best earlier. She said this is a biased sample, right? The majority of us that had families that were able to come over came over on student visas and such. The ones that that I associate with, because mostly are physicians and or others in professional fields where their parents drove that mentality of education into them. But I think that is very biased in the sense that the overwhelming majority of Asians in this world aren't doctors or professors or lawyers, right? We have the entire gamut of professions that Asians in general fulfill. It just so happens that you're currently speaking to a bunch of professionals, and so who had parents that drove that mindset into us, right? But if you take 4 other Asian Americans and we are day laborers, I think that you're still going to hear them speak of the same things about working hard, but I don't necessarily know that the education piece of it would be such a large topic of conversation here today.
That's an excellent point. So what were our struggles? Can we talk about some struggles and some issues that we went through then, or your families? Can you share? Did we go through racism? Can you share your stories of that?
Well, one, I think, issue is that a lot of people kind of see Asians interchangeable. So without understanding kind of the cultural, kind of specific nature of different Asian American groups. So, for instance, I remember when I was in DC and on a subway, and this white man just called out to me, "Go back to China." So I didn't respond back because, I thought he was just an ignorant person. But the fact that, everyone thinks just because I look Asian, I'm Chinese, doesn't really, is an issue that I think a lot of us face, or, whether someone tells me, "Oh, do you know martial arts?" or "Do you know Bruce Lee?" just because I'm Asian, even though I don't practice martial arts. So a lot of these kind of, instances of discrimination, racism that I've encountered since I was young,
Yeah. Did you go through that? I
think
always
daily
say that
we
to
have,
me. They go ching chong ching.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I got that all the time.
Yeah,
What did you
and just on the smaller level, like some of the microaggressions that, I remember being at a meeting with a lot of colleagues, and they were drinking Arizona green tea, and so the question was like, why is green tea good for you? And they're like, well, Wendy must know. Well, why does Wendy know?
But let me tell you this. Do you think that we are being too easily offended these days? Because I'll share with you an incident that happened to me where I chose not to be offended. This was during the 2008 recession. I was a reporter at the Norfolk, Virginia station, WVEC-TV, and the price of rice was going up. So in the editorial meeting, we decided this is a story, and everyone looked at me because I was the only Asian girl in the editorial meeting. And I said to everyone, "Why are you looking at me?" As if I know everything there is to know about rice. And then when I said that, I realized I probably do know a lot about rice, and I know all the grocery stores in town that sell rice and the wholesale distributors and retailers. So, I decided I am going to do this story, so I volunteered, and I told them I'm going to do a better story, a better job on this story than any of y'all. So sure enough, I did the story, but that night when the story aired, I was standing in front of a big wall. We have a graphics, it's called chroma key, and of course there was a picture of a big bag of rice being poured out, and I was standing in front of it. Of course it turned out to be the joke of the town, and I was okay with it, but someone from the Asian American Journalist Association, a group that I belong to, one of my friends told me that it was highly offensive and that they would like to write a letter to one of my superiors. What do you guys think about that?
I think there are inherent dangers in stereotyping. And, we can talk about our stereotypes, as Asians, and a lot of them are relatively positive in that sense. But at the same time, I think that pigeonholes you to a certain degree. And folks start to believe a lot of the stereotypes that they hear, and whether that's positive or negative. And in your particular case, doing a great story and doing a fantastic job on it, is a positive.
It made
but
me
at the
proud
same
of myself.
Oh, absolutely.
But I see what you're saying.
But it
You're
also
saying it
pigeonholes you to a certain degree, and it's kind of like exactly. It's kind of like the Asian leading man in Hollywood, right? Bruce Lee. That's all you've got, really. Until now, perhaps, maybe there's a little bit of a culture shift here, and you have movies like Crazy Rich Asians coming out where you do have some leading Asian and men and women. But up until this point, we as Asian men were pigeonholed into that Bruce Lee stereotype. And unless you could do karate or fight like he did, you were never going to be able to get a role. And so I think that there is danger associated with stereotyping like this.
Wow, that's an excellent point. Thank you. What do you think, Rebecca? Wendy? Or Ben, anything else to add on that and my experience of doing a story on the cost of rice going up?
I see your point in like you wanted the story to be done well,
Yes.
and you didn't want somebody to kind of butcher it and who didn't know about rice.
Right.
So I see your point in why you took honor in that. But I think there are times when people make assumptions that, oh, she's Korean, so she must know about rice. So then that becomes when it becomes like a little like you're the token Asian, and so you do the story. So anyway.
Yeah, I think, even like, for instance, even if I'm only asked to teach like a course like, let's say like Korean media, kind of, just because I'm Korean, it forces that they think that I can only teach the material rather than kind of expanding my fields. I think so it kind of pigeonholes you into like a very narrow representation, even though you personally wanted to do that story. So I think, I think Jeff mentioned about, positive, negative stereotypes. You're just expanding the list of stereotypes without really challenging kind of the preconceived notions that people have about Asians, right?
You guys make excellent points. What about you, Rebecca? Did you go through it? Can you share with us your stories of racism?
I remember as a young girl, like taking the bus to school, like other kids would yell out in the bigger buses, they would yell like ching chong or go back to your country. It was always go back to China. And you couldn't say, well, I'm not from China. I can't go back there. Or when people meet you and they're like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, New Orleans. Where are you really from? As if you don't belong as much as they do. And I do. I was born here, I've contributed a lot to the community. I'm just as New Orleanians as like anybody. But it's just that little bit of like, you don't look like us. You don't belong here.
Jeff?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of the stereotypes and the racism that I encountered growing up have molded me to be the person that I am today. And luckily, I'm a much more mature 42-year-old man at this point, and it doesn't manifest itself in the ways that it did when I was younger. But I had the same thing my whole life, the slanted eyes, ching chong, go back to China kind of things. And when I was really young, I was very passive about it because that's kind of, once again, the stereotype of Asians, and that's what my parents told me, hey, you need to just, turn the other cheek. But then I hit 13, 14 years old, and I was sick of it. And I finally just said, I'm done with turning the other cheek and allowing people to get the better of me simply because I'm not white or black. And so I started fighting. And it only took a couple of fights before folks started realizing, you know what, it's probably not that fun making fun of him for being Chinese, because it kind of hurts having to get into a fight with him. And then from there, it still continued, right? You always have to prove your value, prove your worth, and make sure that others aren't just looking at you and saying, oh, he's an Asian guy, and write you off. And so that now has manifested itself into me working harder than everybody else. I have that chip on my shoulder. I do, in complete transparency, I walk into a room filled with white and black people, and the first thing I think to myself is, I'm the Asian. They all know that. They think they're better than me. So I have to do better. I have to work harder. I have to demonstrate to them why I belong. And I think that as a mature professional at 42 years old, that is a positive for me now. But I fear for people like my son, who's 10 years old and how that's going to manifest in him. And so that is why I think what you're doing today is so important, why it is so important for you to get folks like us together to try to dispel some of the stereotypes and to work on making sure that people aren't not just not racist, but being anti-racist, and everybody being proactive in trying to make sure that there is equality in this country and in this world, so that ultimately my son can live in a world that is better than the one that I live in today.
And what will we teach our children? You have a son, Skylar, and Ben, I know you have an adorable son, Aaron, too. So what are some of the things that you teach your son and will pass on to him for being Asian American?
For me, I think really kind of teaching my son about the history of how Asians have been victims of discrimination, racism, and to really become more active and voice your opinions rather than just staying passive, whether that's, participating in, in political movements or, so really trying, I think it's important for us to voice our opinions, I think. So I'm going to teach my son to become more active in terms of,
Fighting for justice
fighting
and
for
equality,
justice,
speaking up. Wendy, what will you pass on to, or what would you hope that, our younger generation, Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans, will take away from us, and how can we be a better role model for them?
I would hope that they would feel that they belong here and that they're welcome here, and to see what their ancestors and what everyone else has gone through and the struggles that they've been through. Like watching the series, I learned so many things. And what's kind of sad to me is that some of these things are repeating right now in our history. Things like just excluding certain groups and whatnot. So I would, just kind of, I remember being a little girl praying to God that, please make me a white girl, because I got teased, for being a ching chong or go back to China, and I was just so mad at my parents for bringing me here. Why would you bring me to this place where I'm different? And so your whole life you try to fit in, and so my lesson to my child in the future is you do fit in, and you don't have to conform, and you're that you have every right to be here, just like everyone else. So.
How did you overcome, or how did you guys overcome the, being made fun of? How do you overcome that kind of trauma and it gives you low self-esteem, like you said, when people are making fun of you and you feel like you're not part of the popular crowd, or you don't feel assimilated? How did you overcome that? How do you overcome that?
Well, as I mentioned, I may not be the best case to represent.
But fist flew.
I really did. I
you
just
took physical
finally
action.
said that I'm not going to back down from this, and I got into a lot of fights as a kid.
Yeah.
And I don't really want my son to have to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of dialogue currently in this world about trying to be anti-racist, and I'm really, really hopeful that change does occur from this, and that the downstream impact of all the things that are going on in our society today really will positively change the future for my son, so that he doesn't have to walk in my shoes necessarily and fight the same fight I did, and that there is inclusion. Because I was just like Wendy. I remember being a really little kid and wishing I was white, and just thinking to myself, this is terrible. Why did God make me Asian living in America? And it hurt. It really did. And that's why it manifested itself as me ultimately getting angry and just fighting.
And working harder than the next person. And Rebecca, you're a licensed professional counselor. Any advice for how, young kids can overcome being bullied or being made fun of or racism? Is there a positive way to deal with it?
Yeah, I think seek support and talk to other people about it. And you would just be surprised by how prevalent it is. And, everybody's been discriminated against, for different things. So, just talk to people about it, just normalizing, mental health conversations, I think more. With Asian American parents, it's hard with Asian parents because they just, a lot of them, it's
because they don't really
abstract.
Believe in it, right?
Right, they don't really believe it. It's a myth.
They don't think it
the myth
there's
of
stigma.
mental health.
Yes.
So, that's been something, a cause that's been, it's very close to my heart. Just, it's okay, it's okay to be mentally ill. It's okay to talk about it. It's, you know, there's schizophrenics in the Asian American community. No one ever talks about that, you know. Yeah.
Do you guys have any experience of being discriminated against in the workplace or in school, or, you know, losing a job or not having an opportunity because you are Asian American?
I wouldn't say I lost a job, or I think I missed out on opportunities because I didn't speak up or I didn't push for myself enough, because, you know, you're kind of taught to not make waves, or you're taught to just wait till they volunteer you. You don't volunteer yourself. You don't self-promote yourself or anything like that.
Right.
So I think there have been times where I've probably missed out on opportunities because I didn't push for myself hard enough, and only because like I didn't want to make waves or be pushy, and so not necessarily discrimination, but maybe just due to how I was raised, and missed out on some opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced a few instances. For instance, when like my voice is silenced, when I want to voice out my opinions, it's silenced, and or you know, when my voice is not taken seriously by others, or whether, and I think a lot of this institutional racism that happens, you know, sometimes they're not very visible to us, but you know, we can kind of feel it that it's out there. So. Yeah,
It's there.
Yeah, it's there.
What should we do about it?
Wow, that's a tough question.
Should we ignore it? Should we move on? Should we mention? Should we bring it up? Should we talk about it more? What should we do?
Yeah, I think having an open dialogue about it really is helpful. I can't say that I know for a fact that I've had any racial discrimination against me in the workplace from a career advancement perspective, but I will say that although he never mentioned it to me growing up, my dad did, you know, after he retired, did mention that while moving up in the ranks he has a PhD in chemical engineering, while moving up in the ranks of in the chemical engineering world, he felt that he was overlooked for certain positions in leadership due to the fact that he was Asian. And if, I mean, in fact, it still happens today. If you look on the West Coast where all the tech companies are, unless the founder of the company is an Asian American, there are very few Asians that get promoted to the executive level and end up CEOs of these companies. Although the workforce, percentage-wise, is not nearly as whitewashed as the executive leadership level is. You know, I mean, other examples in the United States, I mean, if you look at professional sports, the NFL is predominantly African American, yet owners, how many are there that are African American? Head coaches, there are very few African Americans. And so they've implemented, you know, policies that help to a certain degree in advancing minority groups within leadership in organizations like the NFL. But I think that there's obviously more that can be done. But I don't necessarily know what the answer to this is, because I mean, it's a very, very difficult challenge.
And locally, you know, being in New Orleans, you know, for the Vietnamese community, Chinese American community, the Korean American community, what can we do as a community locally, you know, to help enhance the greater New Orleans area?
I mean, I think there's small pockets of organizations. Like, for instance, I'm involved with the Taiwanese Association of New Orleans, and also APAS, which is the Asian Pacific American Society. And before this quarantine, we put on the Asian Heritage Festival at the Audubon Zoo, and so we all come together and we kind of promote just Asian heritage. And so, you know, whether it's through scholarships or through promoting other people's businesses, or and we just had we do community events like delivered meals to the front line for during the quarantine and COVID crisis, and delivering masks to all the members, and it's just a way for maybe some of the older generation who don't have, you know, English isn't their primary language, they can connect to the younger generation, and we can advocate for them. And so it's just kind of a nice way to not only come together as a community, but also outreach to others who want to know more about Asian American heritage and culture. And
it's so important in terms of support, right, Rebecca? You mentioned the support and the network and the groups that we have. So in the Vietnamese American community in New Orleans, so what are some of the organizations locally that support the Vietnamese American families?
in New Orleans East, there is a big church, and the members of the congregation are very involved in promoting, Vietnamese culture. There's a festival every year, that draws big crowds, and I think there's always work to be done to kind of dispel the myth of what our stereotype is.
Yeah, so it's very important to have that sense of community, right? And
Definitely.
being together, but also talk about the support, why it's important to support one another. If you want a thriving America, you need a thriving minority communities, right? And what do you want people to know about the Asian American community, and how can the Asian American community as a whole come together and support one another? Any concrete ideas or?
Well, I mean, I know from my parents' generation that when they first came to America, they couldn't get bank loans. So what they did was this money pool thing. I don't know if you're familiar.
We have that in the Korean community too. Talk about that, because a lot of communities don't know what we're talking. They think we get a loan from the bank, but it's not from the bank.
So I mean,
Explain to us how this works. I've always wanted to know.
Right.
My parents do it, and I still don't know how it works.
Yeah, my dad, he used to do it.
So they get together, and so that's a great example. Yeah. That's a great example of how they support one another, so they can start businesses, right?
Right.
So
what happens is that you pretty much pool your money each month. Like, everyone contributes $500, and that goes to one family. And eventually it gets to be your turn, and you get that money back. So it was just sort of a way for Asian immigrants to have some capital when the banks wouldn't give it to them. So you had to rely on your community. And they don't necessarily do the money part anymore, but they do get together and have a meal together once a month, and it's a way of fellowship and congregating. But yeah, and that was, you relied on your community to put a down payment on the house you needed,
right,
or put a down payment on the business you want to start. So
it's a great way to concretely support each other, right?
Yeah.
It's a great example. You got to really trust them too, because
Yeah.
sometimes things can go awry, right? Right, Ben? It's ketton, right? In Korea, it's called ketton. Do your parents do that, or do you know? Are you a part of a group? No. Okay. My parents do it still. But I think now, you're right, they get together for the purpose of fellowship and community and having friends, and I think they put together $20, which is nothing, but
Right.
it's
and I
nothing.
think there's some incentive to be the last person, like you get like $1 more or something, or there's for you to wait. So I guess there's a way to.
But back in the day, this was a way they put the down payment on a house or started a business, right? This is how they did it. They got together. So you really have to really trust each other and literally become a family with your neighbors and your friends. One last question for you, Ben. Tell us a little bit about your book. Share with us what your book is about. Beyond the Black and White TV, Asian and Latin American Spectacle in Cold War America.
Well, the book looks at representations of Asian and Latin American performers in the variety show genre, which was very popular in the 1950s and 1960s. And I look at those representations to think about how the U.S. government or even the networks use television as a way to kind of control ideas about nation, about race, and to really kind of shape the perception of the United States across the globe.
And how did they shape the perception, and how did it influence perceptions in America?
Well, I mean, they kind of, a lot of these performers were appear as guests, performed musical performances, so they're really representing positive terms, and the television used them to really kind of shape a positive image of the United States across the globe as a very anti-racist nation. Look at all these performers that we have on television. We're very kind of a multicultural society, when in fact, when you talk to these performers, they couldn't really speak the language, and they couldn't really interact with other performers in the backstage. So on the surface, it looked like there were these assimilated positive representations, but that was not always the case.
So just kind of make it look like
a kind of a
the
false
quotas were
illusion.
False illusion, but the glass ceiling kind of
Yeah.
somehow exists somehow. Let's wrap up with a last final thoughts from each and every one of you guys, and also tell us what we want the community to know about our Asian American community. What do we want people to know about us and maybe kind of, we can resolve to be better representations of the Asian American community. I'll start with you, Rebecca.
One thing I would want to kind of underline is that like Asians are unique and individual. We get like typecast like so much. I hope like the next generation of Asian Americans can kind of be able to like find their voice and be proud of who they are, and venture out from all the tropes that we've been kind of pigeonholed into.
Wendy?
I guess I would like, my take-home message is that when we consider ourselves Asian Americans is to remember that we are Americans. A lot of times we focus on the Asian and we don't, think about the American, and we're both. And so, and it's to understand that we're Americans just like everyone else. So that we just happen to have this little Asian part. And so, and we want to celebrate that as well.
For me, I hope that there will be like stronger alliances between different Asian American groups, and I think that's really becomes powerful because when you think about 1970s, the Asian American activism in California, it was the different Asian American groups, getting together to mobilize efforts to bring change. So the younger generation should seek, and even though we're uniquely different and we have different cultural backgrounds, I think we have to like collaborate together to find a better voice.
That's why the communities are so important. The Asian Pacific American Society, the churches, it's so important to stand together, right? Stand together and stick together. I'll let you have the last final
I think
thought.
watching the video, we saw a lot of struggles that Asians encountered when immigrating to the United States, but they came over for a reason. And it was because this is the land of opportunity and the home of the free, and they were seeking a better life. And ultimately, I think that the Asians that came over were successful in the sense that they were able to become productive members of society and an important part of the culture of America. And I think that the struggle continues, but I think that with more social activism and Asian Americans collectively being proactive and making sure that we are advocates for one another, I think that ultimately we will get to the point where, as Wendy mentions, we are Americans and we are seen as Americans just like everybody else.
So support one another, right? Support one another, listen to one another, collaborate, and be there for each other. I think that's why communities are so important. Jeffrey Kuo, doctor at Ochsner, ER doctor, and also administrator representing the Taiwanese American community. Wendy Jung, developmental psychologist, and also Ben Han, assistant professor in Department of Communication at Tulane University, and Rebecca Wen, licensed professional counselor. Thank you so much to each and every one of you panelists for being here. Appreciate your time and your knowledge and for sharing your stories and family journey with us. Appreciate that, and a big thank you to WYES. Thank you so much for watching.